All right, folks, welcome to another Buckmasters Outdoors podcast. I'm Jackie Bushman with my guest today, Mr. Kyle Marable. Did I get that? Marable.
Yes, sir.
And he's with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System.
There you go.
I always say ACES because that's what it is. It's ACES.
Yep. You can just say extension too. That works too.
All right, this is going to be one of a podcast that we're going to do each quarter. And for all you folks that are into management and biology and stuff like that, these are the experts, and we have them on the podcast to hopefully you can pick up some tips. A little bit about your background, Kyle.
All right. Well, I did got my bachelor's degree at Auburn in wildlife sciences. Left there, spent almost a couple of years working for Quail Unlimited up in West Kentucky, doing some prescribed burning and doing some management work up there, and then went back to grad school at Mississippi State and did some work with translocated turkeys
Really?
out in the Mississippi Delta out there, and then came back to Alabama and spent the last 10 years as a biologist, wildlife biologist with the Alabama Wildlife Federation, and then about 4 months ago came on with Extension and excited to be here and
All right.
and working with them. So
All right, cool deal. Well, they've been a partner of ours for years. Let's talk about today on this podcast prescribed burning.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the legalities of it and state to state, why we need to do it, what are the misconceptions of burning. So let's help our audience out there. If they've never done prescribed burning and we're thinking about it, what would be the process?
all right. Well, like we said, it's going to vary greatly potentially depending on what state you're in. But we can work, working here in Alabama, working with some of our southeastern neighbors, have a lot of similarities. But usually the first thing to do is get in touch with some kind of resource professional, whether that's your local extension agent, whether that's your local Department of Conservation Natural Resources, whether it's a nonprofit agency, whomever it is there who's wildlife professional, a private contractor, forester, private wildlife management consulting service. But always good to start with one of them, and that way you can figure out the needs of your property. It's really easy to be like, hey, I've got this property, I want to do this on it, and then just jump right in. But that's not always the best move. So it's so making sure you know what you want, what you actually need, is a good first step.
Okay.
So working with some kind of resource professional to get that plan in place, especially with prescribed fire. What is the best, especially if you don't have any experience at all with burning, or your property's never been burned, what's the best way to introduce fire to that property? So that resource professional is going to be, a good source for that.
I got you. So start out with a professional. Get them to come out to your property.
Yes, sir.
Take a look and see if this property is burnable. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And most of it's going to be, depending on where you're at. I know here in the southeast, in fact, most of the country east of the Rockies is historically burned, at least once every 10 years or so. So most of this, country naturally is set up to burn. So most of it probably will burn. It's just making sure you introduce fire the right way,
Okay.
and with the right purpose.
So what is the purpose? If somebody said, look, man, I've had a property, I've been leasing property, I've never burned. Why should I burn? What's the benefit of burning?
Yeah, it could be a bunch of different reasons. One, just forest health. Maybe you're trying to, use some kind of, hardwood encroachment into a pine stand or something like that. But from a wildlife standpoint, it creates habitat. We live here in Alabama. A lot of our state has historically been like open pine savannas. That's not what we're used to seeing when we go ride down the road. You don't usually see that. You see it more and more these days with the reestablishment of longleaf pine ecosystems and that. But yeah, it's so by introducing that fire, a lot of the species of plants are fire adapted. They want to burn. They need to burn. They may not flower. They may not reproduce. They may just be dormant in the seed bank until that fire comes through. So that helps a lot with that, and we talk about, I didn't I didn't mention it in my beginning. I'm also a certified wildlife biologist and a prescribed burn manager for the state of Alabama.
Okay.
So, we, when you look at it and you say, hey, what do we want to manage for our property? We want some kind of wildlife. Maybe we want deer, maybe we want turkeys. But you always think about managing the animals, but more times than not, you're managing the plants. So,
Interesting concept.
and you're managing people and plants a lot more than you're managing, the animals themselves.
Right.
And to manage the plants, especially down here in the South, you've got to have fire. You need sunlight and fire. And so if you get that sunlight on the ground, that's how you get your plants. And then a lot of times the fire will promote, will promote certain species.
So by not burning,
Mm-hmm.
you're not helping the plants.
Yeah, that's right. So, we think about, if you, I'm not sure how familiar, you're with plant succession. And, I guess we'll do a quick,
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
rough explanation of it. But, basically you start off with bare ground, and then you get kind of the light seeded annual plant. So the stuff that just kind of comes in, sets up, grows 1 year, puts out seed and reproduces. And then as over time you get, a little heavier stuff, you get more grasses, perennials, a little more shrubby stuff, you get your pines, and then left untouched, you end up with a hardwood stand.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is not where most of our ecosystems down here in the South especially
Mm-hmm.
are supposed to be. They need that disturbance. They're adapted to have a disturbance. And historically that disturbance was fire. So you come in and it would burn, and it would knock back some of that hardwood. It would knock out maybe even some of the pines, and it would keep that area open. And that's how you get, and that's why a lot of the plants are adapted to it.
Mm-hmm.
Even some of the animals, they know what to do when it burns. They go down in a hole, they find a safe space. So that is how it is designed to work. Is with that fire coming through regularly.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, depending on where you're at, it could be, if you're down in Florida, parts of Louisiana, Texas, annual fire is what it would have experienced. If not annual, then it would be, every 2, 3, 4 years, something like that, tops.
So does this bring nutrition to the plants?
It does put some nutrition back because, it takes that plant material and burns it and just drops it back.
Uh-huh.
So it's some of that. Some of it is just scarification of seeds.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it is just removing other stuff that you don't want there.
Gotcha.
So you have the plants that are less fire adapted that will move in and start establishing themselves, but they may be less beneficial.
Gotcha.
So when that fire comes through, it knocks that stuff back
Okay.
and promotes the stuff that you want.
So when do you recommend somebody burning on their property? What's
So-
the right time?
So that really depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
So we call it prescribed fire. So if it's prescribed, that means there's a prescription, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you get medicine, you have a prescription.
Right.
It's trying to treat some kind of symptom or fix some kind of ailment. So with prescribed fire, it's the same way. It's not just one size fits all. So, down here this year, been a tough burn season. We've had a lot of wildfires.
Mm-hmm.
It's either been really dry or really wet. And so, when you think of burning, what do you think? Like me, I'm going to turn it to you for quickly now. Like for what season, what
Right.
time? What do you kind of think on that?
Well, when I've done my property, which I just started in the last 4 or 5 years, I was trying to get rid of some weeds to have some the sage come up for quail.
Yes, sir.
And quail strips and stuff. But all I had was fescue and Johnson weed and all that. So I brought a professional in, and he was looking at my open fields because I wanted to do a quail deal.
Yes.
And he said, "Look, we need to come in and prescribe burn this. I'll get the tractor and make us the ring around it so the fire won't get out and tear up others." I was learning.
Yes.
And he burned it, and we had to get our permits and all that stuff and make sure it was okay to burn. But that's what he was doing. He was burning that to get rid of the weeds so we could have that brown, I guess it's sage.
Yes, so native warm season grasses, so broom
Yes,
sage, blue stem.
broom sage, yeah. And now we got a wonderful deal. And so we checkerboard it, and we can put the quail out. You know what I'm saying? And it really looks like we're almost going back to old South Georgia. And I just don't have the pines, but I've got that brown broom sage.
Yep. So,
But I wouldn't have had that if I wouldn't have burned.
Yes, sir. That helps. Yep. And so yeah, a lot of times, you think about burning. People think about burning, and they think about January, February, March. It's getting towards the end of the March right now. Burn season's over, right? It's not.
No, I did mine in April.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have, there's what's called cool season or dormant season. That's kind of the same thing. It's just, when you burn when the plants start growing, and that has particular job. And if you're introducing fire to something that hasn't ever been burned or hasn't been burned in a really long time, that's often a good time to do it. But there's also growing season burns. And so we're kind of coming up on the growing season right now, and you can burn, April, May, June, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you can burn most of the year.
Right.
So it just depends on what you got and what you're trying to accomplish.
I've noticed in a burn, and then I'm just asking this question: why do the turkeys like a burn?
So that is where a lot of stuff likes burns, and they like it pretty quick.
Yeah.
Because it clears up that vegetation, it opens it up for easy access to bugs. A lot of times if you watch, you start burning a field or something like that, and you'll see hawks start circling. Because we know we have stuff like rabbits and cotton rats, stuff like that are now less hidden.
Yeah, they're exposed now.
So
that makes sense.
So yeah, that's where it opens up. It makes it easier to get in there, easier to scratch around. A lot of times, within a week or two, depending on what season you're burning, they start greening back up pretty quick.
Right.
So you have that nice fresh vegetation in there that's usually really high nutrition.
So let's just categorize it. If you're a deer hunter, you don't turkey hunt, you don't do anything, but you just deer hunt. Why burn?
All right, because for the very same reasons. How tall is a deer?
3 foot to the back.
Yep. So, at most you're reaching up. If they stand up on their back feet, they're 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 feet if they're stretching.
6, 7 at the most.
Yeah. So you've got to get. If there's no food, that's the food line.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the extreme food line.
Uh-huh.
So you really want it down on the ground. So if you don't burn, it closes up. It gets really dense. There's really not much food in there. There's not much open value. But if you start burning, you get that open forest for that burning.
Yeah.
Now you get all those nice plants, all that nice food that is down there within reach.
That new growth, tender growth,
Yes.
that's why they want.
And that variety.
Yeah.
You're not depending. It's so easy to get hung up on, well, we've got white oaks. That's good enough, right? Or we've got, a food plot that's just got, 1 or 2 things in it. That's enough, right? Well, no. Are they adapted to eat just that? No, they're adapted to eat all sorts of things that are supposed to be out in the woods.
So you're giving them that opportunity to get
option.
more of a variety by burning.
Yes.
So for a deer hunter, it's advantageous to burn.
Very much so. I mean, it's very much so. If you're managing for deer, any of the game species that we typically, deer, turkey, quail, they're gonna like it. They're gonna love it, and they need it. It really does benefit them.
I got you. Here's a real dumb question. Okay. When you prescribe burn, why doesn't it burn all your timber down? I mean, what's the difference in a prescribed burn and a friggin' fire?
So, the conditions in which you burn, and the fire regularity. So, when you burn, you look under certain weather conditions. What humidity is my lowest humidity that I'm going to burn at? What's my highest temperature? My wind speeds? Do I want a very intense fire that's going to try to knock back a lot of stuff? Do I want just a fire to ease through there and try to remove some, leaf litter or duff or something like that. So it really just depends on what you're trying to do, and so you try to keep it under those conditions. So that's one reason why, one of the big reasons why it doesn't do it. The other is that, again, a lot of our plants, longleaf pine especially, but even, you get loblolly, and it's old enough, you probably don't want to run it through a really young loblolly stand. Mm-hmm. But you get a big enough loblolly stand, fire tolerant. I mean, they're designed to be burned.
I got you.
And so they're not going to, you can, if you burn it, absolutely get out there in the wrong conditions, you can create a wildfire.
So that's why you need a professional to come out to look at your property to tell you when to burn and how to burn and what conditions to burn in. Or otherwise you'll have a fire that will burn your property down.
That is, that's one of those situations where, at least to begin with, if you've never done it, have zero experience with it, absolutely get somebody out there to talk to you. Okay. Once you get used to it, once you're, and there's different, types of burning too. Again, where if your property has never been burned, you start introducing that burning, and the conditions are different then than after, your third or fourth burn. And so you're going from trying to establish habitat, establish a good burn, routine, and then getting all that kind of set up. And then once you got it set up, it's more of a maintenance situation.
Sure.
And those are usually less intense, a little bit more easygoing, most of the time, So, I highly recommend, that landowners and land managers, get comfortable, learn how to burn yourself, get comfortable doing it. Work with, friends and neighbors and, and whoever else you can to get good at it, because, you can get more acres that way. You can get more in touch with your property that way.
Yeah.
But that is usually, especially if it's a, an old growth stand or a stand that hasn't, has a lot to lose in it, probably want to talk to somebody first. Maybe let somebody else do it first, and then kind of ease into doing it yourself.
Well, are there any misconceptions of burning?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Fire is bad, right?
Yeah.
If you drive by the fire,
I know.
You see the woods on fire, it's scary.
Yeah.
Smokey the Bear did a good job of telling us to put the woods out. And but now, and so that is having to overcome that. Just no, it's not as bad as you think it is, and especially for doing it with a purpose.
Yep.
Wildfire can be very bad. We've had a lot of wildfires this year. They've caused.
Sure.
I mean,
when you watch the news, you say wildfire. I mean, it burned down most of California out there in Los Angeles. So they're sitting there going, well, why am I going to bring somebody on my property and light it up, and it's going to look like Los Angeles?
Yeah, and closer to home, we've lost, there's been several, just a few days ago, I think earlier this week, maybe last week, was the busiest burn day in Forestry Commission history with wildfires.
Really?
So, I mean, so it does have its that is a concern.
Sure.
And that is what a lot of people, are worried about. And I'm going to kill all my plants. I'm going to kill all my animals. I'm going to create a wildfire. That's a lot of the concerns. But when you go into it with a plan, with certain parameters to work under, and stick to it, most of the time that's going to work out in your favor. It's going to work out.
So every animal species benefits from a prescribed burn.
I won't go as far as saying every, but because that's a dangerous word.
Okay.
But I'm going to say most, if not, most of the species in our state at least, are going to benefit to some level from a prescribed fire. I mean, there's certain concerns, and the other concern is that flame, usually the misconception is that fire is the worst part. Fire is the dangerous part. We got to be careful with our fire. The smoke gets you in trouble more than the flame for most people.
Sure.
That is where that smoke management is, in most cases, a bigger concern than the flames.
Really?
when the flames get out and they go burn down a house, that's making the news.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you smoke up, the hospital next to you, or you drop smoke on town,
Right.
and depending on where you're at, make a bunch of people mad.
Yeah.
That's what's going to get more notice on a regular basis.
I got you.
So, to do it, making sure that you have that smoke mitigation, making sure all of that.
All right. So the bottom line is, it can add value to your property.
Mhm.
It can help a lot of the animal species.
Yes.
And a lot of them are looking for it because you're bringing new plants, fresh plants, tender plants.
Yes.
That the deer and the turkeys and those will.
Mhm.
But you got to make sure you call a professional. So in different states, who would they call to be able to bring out to their property or lease?
All right. So, I could, I know like in Alabama, you're going to have to call, the Forestry Commission and get a permit.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, so that's what's going to be in most places is whoever your local Forestry Commission is, that's usually a good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
As far as permitting, different cities may have different regulations as far as permits. So make sure you got local permits,
Mm-hmm.
local regulations. Start with, like I said, the Forestry Commission is a good place to start there.
Okay.
You could also talk to your local extension office.
Okay.
And
they would provide somebody like yourself
yes,
that will come out to the property,
yes,
take a look at it, come up with a good game plan, and figure out the time of the year you need to do it and want to do it. And then the matter of just getting your burn permit, stuff like that.
yes.
And then continue doing a renewal on your property on a yearly basis.
You're going to burn, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you may
Yeah.
burn every year.
Yeah.
You may burn every 2 years.
Yeah.
You may burn every 3 years. Most of probably the wildlife management burning that we're going to do in Alabama is probably going to be 3 years or less. There's some forestry practices, some stuff like that might push it. If you're burning hardwoods, you may be burning less frequently than if you're burning, pines, that sort of thing. But yeah, there's usually going to be, as far as like getting help, there's going to be extension, there's going to be Forestry Commission, there's going to be, whoever your Fish and Wildlife Department is, in your state. There's going to be private consultants,
Sure.
That's, don't want to knock them. They do a good job in a lot of,
Sure.
And so, so there's usually a lot of options. There may be some, not NGOs or something like that to do work. So,
Okay. Is there a website, say there at ACES, they could come and read about it a little bit more after listening to the podcast?
yeah, we do have. It's aces.edu. You can get on there and you can, it says, tell me about or search for, I forget exactly what it says there, and you can put prescribed fire.
Gotcha.
You can put any question there. You can also go to, your Forestry Commission website, whoever that is in your state. They'll a lot of times have a lot of good burning information.
Sure.
So kind of depends on which direction you want to go. Do you want to burn, strictly from a timber management side of things, or do you want to go to a wildlife side of things? And, might influence what website you go to or who you go ask to help for.
I got you. All right, is there anything we didn't cover?
Oh, I don't, man. Probably so, but there's only so much time we can talk, isn't there? So,
I got you.
But yeah, just make sure that when you have a plan, make sure you know what it is. Make sure you stick with it. And talking to some of my colleagues, don't burn on the edge of those prescriptions. Like if it's just on the edge of humidity, just on the out, just find another day, because
Sure.
What we don't want to do is give a bad name to prescribed burning. We want to
Sure.
continue to grow that, make it where the public appreciates it, make it where our other agencies make sure that it's something that we can continue to do and continue to use as the great management tool that it is, and not get it to where nobody wants to let us do it.
Gotcha. That makes plenty of sense. Well, I learned a lot today. And again, if y'all are watching today's podcast, like I said, folks like that, you got to get a professional. Don't go out there and start winging it, and you know that's where we get in trouble.
Yeah, and just make sure you follow your local laws and regulations.
Exactly.
So.
All right, thanks for being on the
glad to hear.
podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, another great Buckmasters Outdoors podcast. Y'all hang in there. We'll have another good one coming soon.